I have the pleasure to introduce Professor JAYATI GHOSH, Professor of Economics of the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Professor GHOSH is a renowned economist and professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst with expertise in development economics. Her research examined the intersection of global economic system, inequality, and sustainable development. JAYATI, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much, Madalena, and it's really a pleasure to be with all of you, even virtually. I have, of course, the utmost respect for UNRIST, which is really in very capable hands with Azita and Madalena, and also for the Graduate Institute in Geneva, where my daughter was also a student. So I'm really happy to be with you here. This is, I think it's already been mentioned in the excellent opening statement, this is actually a period of crisis. Somebody has said recently that, every generation thinks that it is actually on the cusp of a major global transition and crisis, but relatively few have the fortune or misfortune of actually being in one. And I think all of us in this context are in that period where we are seeing, we're on the cusp of very major transformations, and they could go in either way. I think what is immediately evident is that we are going to enter a significant global economic crisis. That goes without saying in the context of just the last few days of what we have experienced, and that what began as a trade crisis could well also become a financial crisis. I don't want to create panic. I just simply want to say that what we are going to experience now in the immediate future is many governments having to operate in crisis mode. And we have seen in the past that crisis modes tend to make governments stop thinking about social policy when they should really be thinking the other way. They should be precisely thinking fundamentally about social policy, and that the most resilient societies and economies are the ones that actually put an emphasis on social policies as development policy, something that UNRIST has championed now for many decades, and that emphasize the importance of not just social protection, but the entire range of development of society that actually makes life worth living in a way, as was so eloquently mentioned in the opening statement. But we do definitely need to make a very strong case for it now. We have to make an even stronger case than we had been making in the past, simply because the world has changed so much, and the world is going to change even if, let us say, everything gets reversed tomorrow. All the crazy tariffs get reversed, the trade wars end, the collapse of the bond markets comes to an end. Even if all of that changes, we know that it's going to be a different world, and one in which governments are less likely to be thinking about the criticality of social policy. So we need to make that very strong case, and I'm sure that definitely UNRIST will continue to be making that, but all of you in the Graduate Institute, all of you students and others who recognize the significance of this will also be able to play a very major role. So what do we need to do? I think critically, we have to emphasize that employment generation is key. And among the many failures of the previous growth model that the globe has experienced, which have led to this current crisis, definitely. In other words, it has culminated in this crisis. Among the many weaknesses has been that of employment generation. The failure to create enough decent work for people who are willing to do it, the fragility and vulnerability of more workers, and the very poor livelihoods that work generates across most of the world, in most societies, including in some of the richest societies. And of course, the counterpart of that is increasing inequality. And it's very interesting that about a decade ago, inequality became a major subject of discussion and concern. And yet after that period, it's increased even more. Just when everyone was talking about, Occupy movement and we are the 99%, and when Thomas Piketty and others were talking about inequality as this major socioeconomic concern, thereafter, we have found a dramatic, massive increase in inequality, particularly the share of assets and incomes controlled by the top 10% of the globe, of the world's population, and then the 1% of the world's population. And this inequality in turn is adding to the desecration of our planet, to the dramatically increasing climate change, and to a whole range of other concerns that we all know about. Employment generation is key to reducing the inequality, but of course, how do we then finance the social policies, the provision of basic needs, the recognition of the rights of all people, not just citizens, but all residents, including migrants? How do we ensure that we have the fiscal balances that will enable this? Usually, whenever you say that we have to deal with any crisis by providing more protection, by ensuring that everybody has their basic needs, by generating more employment through public employment, by creating good quality employment, by paying special attention to women, whenever you say this, policymakers turn around and say, where's the money? How can we raise the resources to do this? We simply cannot afford it. That's typically what we are told. But of course, that is a political decision. And we have to drive that home continuously, that the choice of not having not enough money, that's a political choice because it means that we have not tapped the major sources of public revenue, which are the ultra-rich and the large corporations. So if, in fact, we are in our own societies and across through international cooperation, able to institute a very small wealth tax on the super rich, a 2% tax on their financial assets, say, which is so small relative to, let's say, stock market fluctuations. I mean, many of these multimillionaires and billionaires have lost 10% of their assets through just a stock market fluctuation. Just taxing 2% would generate enough money to actually deal with adaptation needs across the world, the climate adaptation needs globally, for example. But there are many, many more other ways in which this money can be used. Similarly, multinational corporations and very large corporations get away with paying lower taxes than either domestic companies or small and medium enterprises because they can actually figure out ways to avoid the taxation legally by transferring a lot of their profits to tax havens, to low tax jurisdictions, claiming that it's for royalty payments or technical fees or for various other things, or interest payments, or all kinds of devices have been thought of, or by essentially using the loopholes available in tax laws to bring down their taxable profits, their taxable incomes. This can be resolved. It is actually not so difficult to do with a determined government. And particularly with global cooperation, it's possible to actually do this. If we also combine this with sin taxes for extremely carbon-emitting luxury consumption, things like private jets, things like luxury second homes all around the world, and so on, you actually are able to generate enough resources to do the kinds of things we're talking about, the developmental spending, the climate finance, the essential money needed to ensure minimum social and economic rights for everyone on the planet. All of this can be done, it's feasible. But in addition to a global architecture that would enable this kind of progressive fiscal policy, we also have to rethink our development policy. So in a sense, the crisis that has been unleashed by the administration in the US, the Trump government, is something that actually brings home the fact that that model of export-led growth, which really thought that, all you have to do is just somehow increase your export revenues at whatever cost to your own nature, your own society, your own workers, your own pollution, etc. It's essential somehow to just increase exports. That model is now failed. It's dead in the water. We really have to have a new model. And it is, again, possible. So in a way, it's not just a wake-up call. It is now that we are being forced to get away from that export-driven model. And that gives us the freedom to develop more sustainable, more desirable models that focus on basic needs provision, on employment generation, on public services, on small and micro enterprises, and on sustainable patterns of growth. There are many, many options available, and they're necessary, not just to save the planet, but also to save our societies. Now that trade rules have been blown up completely, it is actually possible for many countries to think of ways of managing trade that encourage the development of small and micro industries that develop the capabilities of the people and do not expose them to extremely damaging foreign competition from very large corporations that they cannot compete with. So essentially, this is a message that we should grab, we should seize the pain that this particular crisis is necessarily going to deliver, to think of a new way of organizing our economies. And that also means to reduce external financial dependence and debt-driven growth. Again, these are things that may just result as a fallout of the crisis we face, but if they do, and if they succeed in putting all of our economies on a more sustainable, equitable, socially desirable path, then we should actually think that it's a blessing in disguise, and we should be much more positive about coping with the immediate problems that we know will come. Let me stop here. Thank you.